Hello. We are live. I am Brett. This is Matt. This is our now monthly Q&A. This is focused on cloud native DevOps containers, pretty much containers. I mean, this channel is based on being a container fanboy for 10 years now. So glad you're here. We're driving the conversation based on your comments, which is why it's live. So your questions are what we talk about. And if you haven't been here before, I'm live every Thursday, often with Matt now, and we hang out and have guests, and we've got a packed guest lineup. In fact, for the next 3 months, we're filling up all the dates for the next 3 months already on all the things you probably want to hear about, including stuff about Docker, Kubernetes, Kubernetes in the cloud, all sorts of other projects around that ecosystem in the CNCF. And at the end of the show, we'll talk about who's going to be here next week. And we sort of break that down. And you can actually now, I think below in the description, you can get all sorts of links. Our community that lives in Discord. It's right above Matt's head. DevOps.fan. That's our Discord community. Now 13,000 people. We're very excited about that community. I love hanging out in there because there's so many conversations that I learn stuff on. That's like where I go for news besides Twitter, because people are always sharing stuff in there. If you haven't seen it, if you're not a Discord person, this is our Discord server. And like just the last couple of days, we've been talking about, of course, Swarm, because that's a new hot topic this year as Swarm gets a new release and new features. And you can do this for free. So just sign up at DevOps.fan if you are a Discord person. If not, trust me, it's better than Slack. It's funner than Slack. It's less businessy. It's more fun and community focused. And that's where we all hang out. So that's me, and I have courses. So you can find all those links below. Matt, why are you here? Tell us about yourself.
Well, hey, I'm Matt Williams. I'm evangelist in my day role, I'm an evangelist at a company called Infra, and we're doing some cool things. We got to show our demo last week at KubeCon, which was amazing. Starting to actually reveal what we're doing, the next chapter of the Infra thing. So that was amazing, a lot of fun, and hopefully we'll be sharing more pretty soon. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. I see there's some cool questions coming up, and in fact, when we agreed for me to join you on a regular basis, there was one of the benefits I might bring to the show is I could find new guests and help build out the calendar, and I haven't done that yet. But even if I did, I mean, I'd have to be adding them to like September, because you've got this massive calendar already lined up.
Yeah, we do that, and then it's all my fault. So like Yeah, it's like I get lazy because we filled out the whole calendar. I'm like, we're done, and then we'll suddenly realize we have no guests for any future weeks. We desperately need guests, and I scramble to try to find people. It's an ebb and flow. It's feast or famine. Yeah. But yeah, and especially for the summer. I live in a beach town, and it lights up in the summer, but we go to sleep in the winter. So I hibernate all winter like a bear, and in the summer we spend all of our time outdoors, seeing music. We have a big music festival this weekend called Something in the Water, from Pharrell, and like all of his friends are going to be here blocks away. So that's going to be a crazy weekend. And the point I'm saying all that is I like to have all the calendar set for the summer, because I don't want to have to think about it when we're already spending too much time not working. So yeah, it's nice. It's working out. We're actually filling out the calendar, and it's good. So bring your guests. In fact, if people in chat, if you have an idea of a topic you want to hear or a project you want to hear about, we will try to go hunt those people down. Often I have to go find someone who knows the person, because I don't actually know the people, and I have to go figure out who they are. Because sometimes maintainers are quiet on the internet. They don't always have a public persona. So you have to sometimes find the person who knows the person who knows the person. Like Nuno. He's the person that knows the people that knows the people. Glad you're here. Nuno.
I'm thinking, one of the topics we might want to have at some point. Kennedy asked a question about Docker Hub versus ECS, or I mean, that makes me think, What about all the hubs? What's the
What are my
hubs?
options?
If it almost like a panel of people who run the hubs could be interesting. I don't know if a Docker person wants to be on with a Google person or or vice versa.
Yeah.
Some of the clouds have active policies to not be on the same show as somebody from another cloud, suggesting that those other clouds might exist.
That's true. That's true. I think my strategy tends to be, unless they know each other, I won't do that to them. I mean, maybe it's just because I don't want to be the awkward referee in the middle, like trying to pit people against each other or whatever. And obviously that's not what we're trying to do. We just want to get different opinions. But I do tend to like keep it nice and like only have, what am I trying to think of? Like only have Red Hat on, not Ubuntu and Red Hat, right? Or Amazon and Google. Yeah, I probably wouldn't do that. Talking about all the registries though is an interesting topic because, thanks Kennedy for that topic, because if you think about all the other package managers out there, we don't like in a general case for most people, whether it's npm or Ruby gems or pulling binaries from GitHub or whatever, we don't really like. There tends to be just one place. We don't tend to think about all the different places I got to pull my gems from. You get to a certain size of enterprise, and of course, you end up having to run your own package managers for all your application dependencies. But even then, very few really, I'd say single-digit percentiles run their own like apt dependency repositories or yums or something like that from the OS level. The interesting thing is in the container community, it's not like that at all. It's actually like the one community where you have all these options for registries. And every cloud has one. They seem to want to prefer it or default to it. And then you have ones like Hub or Key. I'm trying to remember what Quay/Key, that one over there. And we have those that are sort of I would kind of look at those as the cloud agnostic ones where both of those exist. And maybe GitHub Container Registry, because GitHub doesn't have a cloud, but you could argue that you could run stuff maybe on code spaces, but they're those three, I guess, and maybe GitLab as well. Like any of the Git hosters will tend to have their own registries, and then, but even bespoke hosters or clouds like Heroku have their own registry, and it's a weird. The other thing that's happening is that registries are becoming an object store, not just container images. So now we've got Helm charts. We just started getting object support for things like SBOMs. Docker now supports volumes inside of their registry, so you can actually store a volume like an image in a registry, almost like a backup. You could use it as backup storage for your volumes. So it's a weird thing where it's like transcending different tooling in terms of a registry, and at the same time we have this gluttony of choice. And it's a great topic. Which one do you use by default? I'm just curious.
I mean, unless I've put something on, for a while I was putting things on AWS's container ECR, I think it is. Everything starts with an E. So I think it was ECR, especially for their, they've got like a build tool, which will run a container from their registry very easily, and it was like a free way of running containers. I had stuff there for a while, but I think Docker Hub is the default for most things, unless I have a reason not to use it.
Yeah, I see a lot of people that are we all started a Docker Hub, right? Like that was the original.
Yeah.
And I see people and teams branching out to really just use them. It's like just local storage or something where we don't really think about it anymore, right? We just put things where we need to put them. You might even say cloud storage for your files is very context specific. So if you're working with a team that uses Microsoft tooling, you're probably going to store your files in OneDrive. If you're on Google, like a lot of us, you're going to just use Google Drive for your storage there. And I tend to find that teams don't really have just one place for file storage. They don't, and so I feel like the same thing is true of images. If I work with teams and we're doing a lot of stuff in GitHub, or maybe we're using GitHub Actions, we're building images there. We tend to use GitHub Container Registry because it's kind of like ECR when you're on the AWS platform. It helps solve some of the secret problems where you have to store secrets and manage the sync, making sure they're up to date. Like you don't have to worry about that on GitHub. For GitHub Container Registry, the same as like you're saying with AWS, they make it easier to use their registry when you're on their platform tooling, and it's fine with me. Like I see teams syncing images across registries. I see that as a thing where they maybe start with them in a place like Docker Hub or GitHub Container Registry, and then they replicate them. There's actually tools to do that where you can sync those images and those repositories across different registries in it's a very manual way. It's more like a pull and push. It's not like the registries themselves sync in most cases. I see teams using Harbor a lot. That's the popular open source. Essentially, it's a wrapper around the standard Docker registry called distribution, and it wraps in a whole bunch of extra tooling and functionality and web GUI and all that wonderful stuff. And I see teams that want to host their own do that a lot. Although I don't recommend it. Like, try to use someone else's registry when you can. Save yourself some time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even if and Kennedy, your question was Docker Hub or ECS, and I'm actually wondering if you meant ECR. Not sure if you're asking for registry. So if you have a more specific question, let us know. But I would say it's just purpose fit. Like, use the registry that's right in front of you, that's most convenient. Unless you have like other requirements around security, sort of provenance, maybe where you have to have this thing in a place and be able to build it yourself, and maybe in your own data center, or you don't trust ECR, so you have to run your own registry inside of a VPC of AWS or something like that. And I've worked with teams that have that mandate, and they don't like ECR. I was actually just spending time last week with someone where we were trying to figure out all these things that were showing up in ECR that said they weren't tagged. It was a bunch of different untagged objects, and it just turns out that ECR is very raw in its web interface for showing you just all the different assets and objects it has. And so Kennedy is talking about ECR. That's what I thought. And ECR, so I don't really like ECR's web interface because it's not intelligent. It doesn't understand different resource types. It doesn't understand the new stuff like SBOMs or attestations or anything that's not a traditional image. Even a multi-platform image, if you build two different multi-platform images, like an ARM one and an AMD one, and then you push them to ECR, it then shows up as at least 3, possibly 4 different objects in their list. And so it can be very confusing of what you're looking at because it doesn't actually say, like, in the background, there's all these little JSON files and they all link to each other. And we all mostly don't care about the internals like that. And ECR shows you the internals by default, which I think for a lot of people is very confusing. Docker Hub is meant to be used by humans, and it actually hides a lot of that. It surfaces information when you need it. And so I feel like right now, Hub is the only one that really is trying hard to make the registry better. And everyone else is just like, we did it. It's there.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
I mean, when Docker started, there was no option for another hub. So it defaults to using Docker Hub. Docker Hub's become kind of a profit center for Docker as a company. So it makes sense for that they would be all in on that. Make it possible to use other hubs, but they're going to default to Docker Hub. But I think newer projects, as they come out into a already established world, they know that they have to be more open from the beginning. I'm thinking of like Dino. If you write an application or a utility in Dino, which was like a alternate to Node.js, and it's all written in TypeScript. When you add libraries at the beginning, it will like default to pulling these things from Dino, but you really have to specify the full URL of that path that exists on the Dino website, dino.w.
Yeah.
But there's so many other. I mean, GitHub is a popular place to pull things from as well. So it's a little bit more open to begin with,
Right.
focusing on itself, but open to everything.
I feel like there's almost a opportunity here. Like we're describing a scenario where if you don't subscribe to Docker, so you don't get the benefit of the paid features on Docker Hub, and you maybe like something like Harbor, which is, I would say, probably the best self-hosted registry. There's a couple of other projects out there, but I feel like they're more niche, and they have a very specific target that they're going to try to go for. Where Harbor, we're talking about this thing right here. Harbor is sort of the generic CNCF project for all object storage in what we now call the OCI registry. It's got a nice interface. It has, you can do scanning, you can do not ephemeral, but immutable tagging, where you can make sure that tags aren't reused in a certain, like if you have a regex, you can sort of specify a regex and say if the tag starts with stable, it can't be reused or something like that. I've seen teams do that. And I don't know, I actually was just Googling this while you were talking. I don't know if there is a company that's offering SaaS-based hosting of something like Harbor. There probably is, and I probably just don't know about them. But that seems to be like a company that basically says, we'll host this for you. We'll even host it in the different clouds for you. Because, you know, we've sort of all seen sort of niche platforms that, you know, like the MongoDB Atlas or whatever, where they will host it in each of the major clouds. Where basically, I see teams that like they use 2 or 3 different types of registries, and they all have different interfaces. They all have different quirks. They all have various levels of support for different object types. And maybe there's an opportunity there for a company that's like, we're going to put Harbor everywhere, and we'll keep it up to date for you, and it's going to be closest to wherever you need it in the cloud, whatever cloud you want. And we can even offer things like replication for free, which you can do in Harbor. You can actually go in Harbor and say, pull down images on a regular basis from this location. It's got I don't know if they're called plugins. I actually forget what it's called, but it's got lots of features in there. And it would be, but you still have to run it. You still have to maintain it, design and ensure its high availability, monitor it, all that stuff. And it is kind of storing all of your most precious data. So you don't want a supply chain attack. So it's a very important thing that you want to protect. And who wants to be burdened with all that work? So it's like maybe there's an opportunity there for somebody. It's a good conversation, Kennedy.
I kind of wish there was a tool. Maybe it's delivered as a Docker container that you run on your local development environment on your Docker desktop or Podman or whatever it is, and it was almost like an aggregator of all the hubs. So I can do a search on this one thing and see all the hubs, and maybe I prioritize some versus others. And
like,
then,
in other words, a directory.
It's
like,
out there.
You're looking like a central directory.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to have a central directory that's hosted by somebody else, because I mean, maybe they're going to decide that a Docker Hub item is more important than a Google. I mean, I prefer Google instead of Docker, and so I should be able to prioritize things myself. And maybe I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Well, that is you're describing a known problem, actually, of how do I know where images are and which images I should be using and who has the most current. Especially if my company has multiple registries. There is a way for registries to proxy other registries. That's a part of the registry protocol. So you technically could have like a main registry that allows you to go get others, but it wouldn't necessarily, I don't think that registry wouldn't necessarily expose all those upstream, maybe registries behind it.
Yeah.
The interesting thing that maybe you haven't realized, and I'm showing this for the audience there, that Docker Hub is the one place, though, where it does list that it's a case-by-case basis, so it's very special. But they do technically do this for some images. So if I just look up IIS, for example, which is a very Microsoft focused. That's going to be a bad. That is not what I want. I'm looking for official images. Let's see if I can't find.
Oh yeah.
No,
Okay.
I don't want mono. I'm looking for. There we go. Here we go. Updated 2022 years ago. That's a long time. Okay. So my point here is so here I go. So if I go to Microsoft, these images don't actually live on. This is not what I really want looking for, but they don't actually live here. This is not what I'm looking for. So I don't know if it's anyone other than Microsoft. Maybe Oracle databases, not Oracle. Those. This is like a demo fail because I see them all the time, but I never remember which organizations. I'm looking for organizations. Yeah, so Nuno's saying like mcr.microsoft.com, but what we're looking for is that a lot of these official images from these big companies that have chosen to put their own images on their own registries, you can find them on Hub because Hub has this relationship, this partnership with them where it lists their images, but it doesn't actually host their images. So it's kind of, I think, what you're suggesting. It acts like a directory.
Yeah. And, I mean, I guess I would like a tool that is both that, an aggregator of directories, but also, when I download something, it caches it from all the, because does Docker, Docker will cache the images. I don't know. I almost want actually, no, as I think about that doesn't make any sense because it already caches. So,
here's real quick. Here's one quick example. This is a bad image. I'm not sure. It is current. Well, maybe it is current, but it is listed in the directory. But when you see the Docker pull command, it's pulling from Microsoft's mcr.microsoft.com, which is what Nuno was talking about. So it's technically listed here, but it's not hosted here. And this is weird too, because it doesn't actually indicate this is official. I can't click on the Microsoft link. There's a little, and it's not showing me like tags because it doesn't actually know all the tags. It's just sort of it's almost like a redirect, but not really. It is kind of weird though. And they've been doing this for years. Actually, there were, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, Microsoft had said, "Hey, look, we don't want to depend on Docker Hub, but we're going to move our stuff to our own little sandbox. We're taking our toys and going home kind of thing." But they didn't want people. They didn't want to just disappear from Hub, and then people didn't know how to get their stuff, I guess.
Right.
It's not like I talked to the people and know what their motives were, but. You might notice that sometimes where if you're and I think that Oracle might be one of the other ones. There's not that many of them because it's a special thing. But it would really, really cool, I think, if you could just point this, like in your own account, you could point a repository and say, hey, this is actually a repository that lives somewhere else. Could you just list it here as a directory? And the captains actually have suggested that to Docker for years. We've said, like, wouldn't it be great, like whenever we had this idea feedback thing with them, which happens a couple times a year. That's usually one of the requests that comes up that says, hey, there's that, there's a couple of, for Helm charts and operators, there's Operator Hub, and there's places you can go and search for those kind of artifacts. And wouldn't it be nice if we all had like the Google of images that we could search for all that stuff? And now it's getting even more weird because now you can have all these other object types. So how do you search for those in Hub? And every different registry experience and UI is different for that. So it can be a little annoying, I find, because they're not even all consistent in the way that they represent and support other artifact types. So one might not even support Hub or Harbor chart. It's not Harbor, sorry, Helm charts. But if they do support the Helm chart, they may not even show it. Or if they do show it, they may not. They may say it's an undefined object. It depends on which one you're on, and I find it frustrating. It seems like nobody else cares about this other than Docker. It seems like all the other registries just are like, yeah, whatever. it's up to you. Yeah, Artifact Hub, like Nuno's
Right.
talking about. Artifact Hub is where it's basically a search for a decentralized, it is for decentralized storage of those kind of artifacts like Helm. This is a centralized searching website that allows you to list projects. And all right, so next topic. This is actually a pretty good one. I feel like we both have opinions here.
Yeah.
Venetia, sorry if I mispronounced that. Trying to figure out how to say that one. This is a good one. So there is that statement, that first question you have. People are saying platform engineering will kill DevOps by 2025. It is a complete marketing fabrication. It is not in any way true. They are not incompatible. One does not supersede the other. It is a few companies, and one in particular that I will not name. I don't even want to give them airspace on this show. That their marketing tactic has been to get attention by downplaying DevOps and promoting platform engineering. My take is platform engineering is not new. We've had it for decades. We used to call it self-service. That was really what encompassed the most of the objectives of platform engineering. And I'm sure that someone who's really in the platform engineering camp would love to debate with me on that because they feel like it does all these other things. But at the end of the day, you're trying to create a platform to help developers and other project team members do their work without DevOps involvement. That's if you there's different definitions. There is no single definition of DevOps. Well, there kind of is, but there's lots of things that people think are DevOps. And I would say the same thing is true of platform engineering. A lot of people have different ideas about what that means, but I think at the end of the day, it's really about a strategy and a group of teams working together to build an internal platform for your developers and the people in the developer ecosystem, like DevOps people or ops people, that allow them to get their job done. It's like what if we all did DevOps and SRE, and we just focused on that, and we built a tool that others could use to get their job done. But these are already concepts of DevOps. Like DevOps has these concepts around automation, and your customer is not just external, but also internal. These are all DevOps concepts. They've been around for 15 years. So platform engineering to me is a rebranding for marketing purposes of product companies that want to market to DevOps people. So you're safe. Learn DevOps. It's still a thing. It's still going to be a thing. It's not going away.
So my opinion on this is, I mean, I had to actually look up, well, what is platform engineering? So I searched define platform engineering, and I don't know, something that came up showed that platform engineering is a discipline of designing and a bunch of stuff. And so, I think of platform engineering as a discipline, whereas DevOps is not a discipline. It's a way of doing things. It's as an organizer, formerly of the Boston DevOps days, but now Seattle DevOps days. I think about what is the definition of DevOps, and a bunch of friends that are in the global DevOps days kind of organization committees. And DevOps is not just, it's not just about, in fact, one of the questions that came in at DevOps Days Seattle last year, somebody came up to me and said, why do you have some of these talks? They're not DevOps. DevOps is about CI/CD, and it's about these specific tools and tool chains. And no, DevOps is not about those specific things. If you hire somebody to do the DevOps, well, I think you kind of think about it wrong. It's culture is just as important as the technology, and measuring is just as important as any of those. I mean, the culture of having the developer teams talking to the operations teams and working together to get things rather than throwing things over a wall. That's what DevOps is about, that communication and culture. And platform engineering seems to be, okay, let's take a subset of what DevOps is, maybe around the tools and tool chain and having the tools to be able to build out your developer stuff on your own. Yeah, sure. Okay, that's could be platform engineering, and that's a part of DevOps, but DevOps is a whole lot bigger than that. So
Yeah,
it is.
I agree with all of that. Like I've even though my title has included the word DevOps in some capacity for a decade,
Yep.
I still don't agree with the word DevOps in a title. I feel like that's saying, like, there was someone who said that, I don't remember who originally told me this, but I was reading something that said that's like calling yourself agile. Like, I'm an agile developer, that's my title. Or I'm because it's a way of working. It's a very broad set of things that don't even apply to it's not just engineering. It's not just if you read any of the books on DevOps, it encompasses a lot more than the developer and the operator, and it affects project management, it affects customer relationships, it affects metrics and monitoring, it affects how you engage with your customers. It's a wide array of disciplines inside of sort of almost like a culture definition of how do you all operate your technology in order to meet your customer needs. And to me, platform engineering I guess you could argue that maybe in some cases SREs are very much focused on production and improving tooling to help serve customers and so they also have external and internal customers. Maybe platform engineering could be something where you have a team of people that are exclusively focused on internal tooling for developers and stuff. But this is not like, this is one of those things where you do not specialize in platform engineering, in my opinion. Like, it is a job role, maybe. It is not something that you're going to go get a new course on that's going to make you a platform engineer where you weren't before. I just have strong opinions on this because I feel like we're doing the community a disservice when we imply that there's one replaces another or one versus another. Right. These are all distractions because at the end of the day, we're all developing, operating a bunch of systems to meet business goals. And that's really what this is. It's all encompassing, whether it's DevOps or SRE or Agile or platform engineering. All these terms are just inside the same realm of what's the business need? How do we ship faster, iterate faster, more securely with less downtime and meet the customer needs and then get feedback from the customer to do it all again over and over and over and over again. And these are all like little pieces of that puzzle. So the sad thing is we get this question about every month now. In fact, I just answered a survey. I don't even remember whose survey it was. Just a few days ago, one of the companies that I use their tools had a survey, and they asked about platform engineering replacing DevOps as a part of their survey, which I thought was, I almost wanted to like yell at the survey. I was like, how dare you ask me this question? So I had lots of opinions on like this is not a thing. Stop trying to make it a thing. It is. I haven't met a single person that's doing any platform engineering suddenly to, evolve from DevOps. Like, there's just no one's doing that in the real world. At least no one that I've ever talked to. So it's just weird. It's a weird conversation to have. It's like debating something that doesn't exist, in my opinion. Like this, 15 years ago, no, I'm sorry, almost 20 years ago, I was operating a team purely, exclusively Microsoft engineers. We did not know what the term DevOps meant, but we were implementing a lot of the things that we all now consider DevOps in a Microsoft data center. Not Microsoft Inc., but like in a data center exclusively running Windows and Microsoft products with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of servers, thousands and thousands of desktops. And we were doing all this. We were implementing self-service so developers could spin up their own environments, could deploy applications without our involvement, that new projects could start without sort of the the Phoenix Project sort of scenario of everything's a disaster, everything's an emergency because they need it now, and we operationalized and standardized all these different parts of the IT project, and I've just been repeating that stuff for 20 years, and we've refined it, and we all know we have definitions that are better now, and we all understand a lot of these things. We get specific tooling that's guiding us through some of the processes, but I still feel like these are 20-plus-year-old ideas that we're all just renaming, and you could still go find the original DevOps handbook, still just as good today. I know that because I'm re-listening to the second edition, which came out 2 years ago. Which should tell you something, audience. Like if the experts in the industry thought that platform engineering was somehow replacing DevOps, they probably wouldn't still be writing DevOps books. But Gene Kim and a lot of the others that wrote that book, they updated it, released a new one a little over a year ago, and it's got all this new stuff in it. It actually talks about Docker Kubernetes now, because when it was released, containers didn't exist, and or at least maybe they were like so brand new, I think, that you couldn't talk about them yet. But anyway, as you can tell, I get worked up. The Not Platform Engineering Show. That's what we're going to call this episode.
Yeah. No, I don't know, and I think platform. As a term. It's it's like there's been a long discussion about monitoring versus observability, and observability basically comes out with a new word, a new definition that tries to redefine what monitoring is, has always been, and therefore observability is a tool that does observability versus monitoring is somehow better for a customer, when in fact it does the same things as what a monitoring tool could be doing. And I'm sure somebody's going to listen to this and no, observability is very different, but yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, sometimes sometimes like a term, I can see how like a term would, one of the biggest complaints about the word DevOps is that it's become so overused and broad that it doesn't have any teeth anymore. So Emily on Revolution, is it Revolution? I'm going to have to look it up. Hold on. It was a GitHub Universe talk.
Oh, okay.
And
Emily was a DevRel at
Emily
Microsoft?
Emily Freeman.
Yeah. Emily can edit. That is her. Something can edit.
So I'm pulling this up. Yeah. Here's an example of like, this is a great video. I'm going to put it in chat. You should watch it. You should absolutely watch it. She and a team worked really good on it, a long time on it, because it's a very professionally well done, high production value video around. We've had this software lifecycle, the SDLC, for 50 years now, probably at least. Over the last 60 years, and DevOps was a part of that, but it didn't really encompass it. It could encompass everything in that, but the problem with the word DevOps is we've now got it so focused on things like CI/CD and automation, and we think that that's the job title, even though it was never what the term was meant to be for, that the industry has basically commandeered that term and using it now for like DevOps engineer as a title, which really just means build engineer or automation engineer or CI/CD engineer, or maybe sometimes it's even used just to be an operations engineer, which we've had for decades and decades. But this YouTube video is her attempt at rethinking how we might approach this if we were to take the ideas of DevOps and to be much more specific and targeted and almost tactical with the different layers of what we all have to deal with. And what should we call that? I think she's calling it revolution. And she's only talked about it a couple of times. I think there's maybe 2 or 3 talks out there. I was trying to look for the.
Yeah, I remember one of her. I mean, she's a great presenter, and one of her talks from RevolutionConf in Virginia Beach was, I think, one of the best, kind of one of the best overall. Just, I can't even remember what it was about. Something about the stories that she was telling to her child and how they relate to DevOps. As like a fantastic presentation. So she's a great presenter for whatever, anytime she presents.
Yeah, and this model is. It's much more encompassing, and it's not like you can implement this. Like, it's not something that we can just read a book and go, oh yeah, I'm gonna change tactics now because I'm moving from DevOps to Revolution. But I think that's the idea. At least that's from getting what she's trying to do here. It's like, if this were to catch on and others were to throw in their input and it not just be hers, that it could turn into something where it becomes more prescriptive, and we move beyond, like, what's after the DevOps handbook, because I feel like that plus a couple other good books. I mean, we now have very targeted books around like distributed computing or cloud native infrastructure. We have some books that are very focused on niche parts of the industry, but how do we bring all that together in a way that we can talk about it as a whole, rather than like things like platform engineering, which probably are a component inside here, but it's not the thing. Yeah. Anyway, that's a good talk.
Yeah.
So
it's about creating other. Oh, sorry. Were you?
Sorry, I was going to throw up the next question. Did you have something else?
No, I mean, it's the same guy, same person asking about, can I work in DevOps with their coding skills? Okay. Yeah, I mean, although, and then somebody below says, oh, that's what I do now. I'm a DevOps engineer with limited coding skills, but strong scripting skills, which is kind of coding skills. So I'm a DevOps engineer with limited coding skills and strong coding skills. I don't know. But I mean, whatever your coding skills, I don't know if that really matters for a lot of things. I mean, there's definitely people with the skill set that you come in. I mean, because DevOps or platform engineering or whatever we want to call it, SRE. I mean, all these things. There's such a wide number of things that fit into that job role or that job title that whether you have coding skills or not. I mean, there's room for, as long as the organization is big enough to need people with different backgrounds. I mean, it all works. I mean, as long as, I mean, I guess, is there a hiring manager that wants to hire you? I mean, that's the question. Is if selling a house, is it worth a certain amount of money? Well, it is if there's somebody willing to buy it. It depends on where you're working. I mean, so I'd say, yeah, sure. It's a long way of saying yes.
Well, this is a very good question. I get it a lot. I'd say almost every one of these episodes, I get that question around, I'm an operator, or I'm exclusively a developer, or should I get into DevOps when I only know one area of what we perceive to be a DevOps role to be? And like Matt's saying, there are so many different, since DevOps is not really a role, there are so many different job types that can work in the DevOps space. When you see companies that have a job offer that the word DevOps is in the title, more often than not, that job means something around build engineering, CI/CD, and automations. Basically, you're not quite the developer making the app, and you're maybe not the operator who's managing production and watching metrics and observability. You're someone in the middle. And that tends to be a majority of any role that has the word DevOps in the title, basically. But what that means is that there is a wide array of skill sets, and most DevOps engineers do not have them all. Most. There are exceptions of all-star, amazing people. We see them at conferences. I don't even consider myself one of them, even though I have this world I've built around the word DevOps, and everything I do is got a word DevOps in it somewhere. But I think I wrote this in our, speaking of our Discord community earlier, again, above Matt over there, DevOps.fan. In that community, I think I ranted for a full page of information where I basically was giving someone my history of almost 30 years in tech, except for one job where I wrote PHP code for money. I have never been paid for my coding skills, but I consider myself essentially doing DevOps work for the last almost 20 years. Because we didn't know what to call it in the 2000s, but that's essentially what I was trying to do. I was running engineering, server engineering teams, partnering with the developer team, partnering with the ops teams because they both sat on different sides of me, and I was trying to be that person in the middle to bring everyone together. Let's have a meeting where we all optimize the workflow and get your stuff into production over and over again, faster and faster and faster. That was really the beginning of what we all now consider DevOps, and I didn't know what infrastructure as code was. I didn't even know how YAML. I didn't even know YAML was a language. So that was very, very early days, and I did not need developer skills to do it. Now, are there DevOps jobs or jobs that are labeled DevOps that expect you to know Bash and Python or Node.js or Golang? Yes, but if you're not a programmer, if that's not your skill set, then you wouldn't apply for those jobs. You would go look for DevOps jobs that don't necessarily expect a high degree of programming. If you're looking for something to get involved with first, just focus on Bash scripting. I think that's probably the most fundamental programming specific language or tool that just about every DevOps person is expected to know. After that, it's really about what the company uses and what programming languages they use, and what does the DevOps team use? Does the DevOps team have a standard that focuses on using Python? Maybe they use a lot of Terraform, but when they have to, they maybe use some Bash or Python. I've seen advanced DevOps teams that they all program in Go, and they use Golang as a tooling language to build their automation tooling for getting their job done. But they're an exception. They're advanced. That's the kind of job that I probably wouldn't get because I don't consider myself even a good Golang programmer. What you will do over the course of your life or your career, once you get into DevOps, is that you will continue to have to learn what all the devs are doing and what all the ops are doing. Because if you're kind of playing one of those roles in the middle, you're going to be constantly learning from them, which means you're going to have to learn their programming languages a little bit. Doesn't mean you can actually write the programming language on your own without the internet, without Stack Overflow, right? But it does mean that you can you understand their package manager. That's really one of the most key things, I think, and again, if we're going to call this DevOps thing a job, is that you understand dependencies. And you know that Java uses a particular tool to get its dependencies and all the libraries and things it needs to run. And that Python is different, and it has nuances in its own command line. And Node.js is different, and PHP and Ruby all have their own things. And it's important for you to learn what those things are and their basics and how to actually run their commands. But that's not programming. That's like saying that installing an apt application, or a Yum or a Brew or any of these other dependency tools, it's like saying that that's programming. It's not. So what I usually end up when I have interns, and I've done that before, where we bring in interns, and if they come from the sysadmin world, like I did, we don't tell them go learn a language. We sit them down and say, here's my Node.js app. I need you to look at the Docker file, understand what those commands are, and then go learn those commands so that you know how we install our Node.js app and how we get its dependencies. What that forces them to do is then learn the npm command line for how to go get and install dependencies. And to do that, they have to kind of look at these files, which means they start to learn how those files work. This is like the very beginning of someone's DevOps journey, right? And so that to me is maybe someone who's going to be more in the spectrum. They're going to be more on the operator side or the sysadmin side of the DevOps spectrum, not the I'm a pro developer side of that spectrum. In fact, I don't think Matt has seen this. I have this thing called DevOps Spectrum. I'm just going to bring it up on screen. And this is how I describe to people, where are you, right? So I can move this pointer. If you're coming from developer-oriented work and you don't necessarily know a lot, if you've never built a Linux kernel, if you don't quite understand the nuances of apt versus yum, or exactly how to program or to configure systemd for Linux, if you don't know the breakdown of IP stacks and what VES are, virtual Ethernet interfaces, then you're maybe more on this dev side. But if you're someone that knows all that stuff, but you don't really know any programming languages, maybe you can read, some bash. You can at least read it and understand the gist of what a bash script is doing. Then you're maybe over here. If you don't know any bash, then maybe you're all the way over here in ops, and you are used to the sysadmin life of, especially if you come from a Windows background, of just looking at GUIs and you do all that clicking and very little program sort of CLI work, right? You maybe do very little of that. I'd say most of the jobs in DevOps are here in the middle, which means you know how to read some languages. You might even know one. You might even feel comfortable creating basic applications in a single language. Maybe it's Bash, maybe it's Python, two of the more popular DevOps automation languages. But the key there is that you maybe know a lot of tools. You know Docker now. You've learned Kubernetes a little bit. You know how to use Terraform to manage the cloud, and that puts you like right in the middle. So you know YAML. You know a little bit of this automation work. If you had to, you could maybe make a bash script. If you were forced to, you could make a workable bash script. Of course, now that we all have ChatGPT, that's becoming way easier to do. I find, languages that I don't use very often, that's one of the best use cases for ChatGPT in my world, because I maybe need to edit something, or I need to add something, or I need to create a little bit of automation, but I don't have every single syntax feature of bash written down. And I'm finding that like Copilot with GitHub and ChatGPT can really help there. So anyway, no reason why you can't get into DevOps. I guess that's really what we're saying.
Yeah.
No reason.
Yeah, and I
can't do it.
I think one of the things that you talked about, I think one of the most important skills, no matter what job you're taking. And in fact, if you see a job role that's on some website, and you're thinking about applying for that, have I frozen? You're thinking about applying to that job. If you are the exact match for that job role, you do everything on that job role exactly. You are exactly the right person you're looking for. I hope you don't take that job, because they're looking for somebody that can do all those things. But I would want to take a job where I can't do all the things, because that way I do most of them. I can do most of those things, but I'm going to grow into the role that they want. And if they just want the person who is in that role right now, or does all those things right now, and that's the role we're going to hire for, and we don't want somebody who's going to expand past that because we want this role forever, that sounds like a horrible role to take, because now I'm not going to be able to grow as in whatever role I'm in. I want to be able to learn new things, and if I'm on more of the dev side of that spectrum, learning more of the ops tools, or if I'm more on the ops side with less dev stuff, learning more of the developer tools, and maybe you are in that role where they've said the job role is exactly your skill set, and we don't want you to expand. Well, maybe your job extends to going home and learning about all the other things and extending your skill set, so you can get a better job the next time around, and into a role that you're allowed to grow. Every role I've taken, every job listing that I've applied for and gotten has been, has described somebody who is 130% of who I am, and not exactly who I am, because I want to be able to grow into the role. And I think any hiring manager is going to want somebody who is not the perfect person, because then, if somebody's the perfect person, then they're going to sit back and relax and just kind of do the job on autopilot, and not really, be excited. And for me, if I'm going to be stuck in doing something the same thing over and over and over again all the time, like, I don't know, drilling something on a drill press and just constantly making the same hole over and over again in 50,000 parts a day, that would be deadly dull for me, and I don't want that job. So, I want to have the job where I'm growing into it constantly, and that's the role. Every role I've taken has been like that, and it's been great.
Yeah. On this topic of coming from specifically the sysadmin background, I get a lot of my clients, because they take courses from me, and this speaks a little bit to a couple of the questions here. They're getting into containers as their first step into DevOps. That tends to be, it's a small little trend I notice in companies that are, we've had containers for 10 years now, or at least what we consider modern containers. Docker has been around for over 10 years. And those companies that are just now dipping into it, I would consider them laggards. Not a bad thing necessarily, but it just means they're not trying to be on the tip of the spear of all this technology stuff. They're maybe more conservative, or they're in a space that's not known for having leading edge tech, so they don't need to be there. Their competitors maybe aren't there yet, so they're not trying to, catch up with everyone else. So in those worlds, the DevOps people they need tend to be less devy and more opsy. And specifically one client, they're a financial services company, and they have a dedicated developer team that makes internal tools for their financial people, and they make financial-based tooling internally. But they've been putting it on servers in a very traditional way. They even make desktop apps, like full-fledged GUI apps for their users. It's a very Microsoft-centric environment. They don't have really any Linux. So this was doing containers also meant they were doing Linux, and they're doing a lot of things new. Like the DevOps was a new thing for them. And so one of the things we went through, was the engineering leads of all the teams, the operations lead, the dev lead, they all had to read. I basically asked them all to read DevOps Handbook, because I wanted us all to, not that book is the only book to read, but it covers a wide array, and it's got a deep stack of experts in the industry that have been doing this stuff for well over a decade, and it covers a lot of topics that would, some of the topics aren't going to be interesting to developers, and some of them aren't going to be as interesting to an operator, but it brings all this stuff together so that you essentially at the end there, what they're really trying to figure out is how do my operator and my developer teams work together better so that we can ship code more often and more reliably. That ends up being one of their big first focuses. And to do that, they needed someone who could speak a little bit of developer, but really, for them and a lot of other companies, it becomes the operator or the sysadmin's job to implement a lot of this stuff, like continuous integration, continuous deployment, infrastructure as code. A lot of those core toolings, I guess we're going to call that, like that's an implementation detail, but those things had to happen before the developers could start realizing that they could actually ship code to production now without someone else's help. They could iterate much more quickly because their workflow had been streamlined. And they understood that things like metrics coming back from the customer was going to feed their sort of their feedback loop of their new every time they're going to do software, they're going to release new software, they're going to get more feedback, and they need to start gathering that feedback so they can make informed decisions. Well, that whole thing, they wanted to see something practical, some real significant movement or measurement that they could say, we spent all this money on a consultant and all this time and effort. What did we do? One of the things that was, well, let's show how you can ship quickly without operations involvement. And let's improve that metric of you went from once a week to 3 times a day. and and nothing went down. You didn't have to schedule maintenance windows. Like, these were all things that they were doing because they weren't operating in even what you might consider an agile environment. But that didn't require the operators and the team that I was working with to implement these tools. None of us really were programmers. The two people I was working with, absolutely not programmers. It was not even in their job role because they were focused on sysadmin and operations. And they were Windows guys running Linux, so they weren't super comfortable with everything Linux, but they Stack Overflowed it. They figured it out. They got the tooling. They got the scripts and the automation. They read the manuals of the tools I gave them. So I'm going to pause for a minute, but if someone forced me to say, when you hire a DevOps person, pick 2 attributes that's going to be most likely a leading indicator on their success in the job. Those two things have nothing to do with you being able to program or how many languages you know. It has to do with how much do you share what you know, and how much do you do it, and how do you do it? How do you share? Because in a DevOps environment, you have to be able to share a lot. It has to be in your blood to give your knowledge away and to help others and to share with others in your team. That has to be like that. I have to see that. Like, I want to see you writing your own blog. I want to see you sharing on GitHub, open source, the stuff you're creating, even if you're not a developer, the way you're implementing tools and how you're helping others. Because if you can do that, like if you have 5 people in a team together and they all have their own expertise, but they all share and it's in their blood, wow, that's going to be a powerful team, right? Like, they're really going to be able to do more together because they all naturally want to inform and help. Second thing is, how do you learn and basically teach me what you're learning, show me what you're learning now, what you've learned over the last year, and show me how much of the ecosystem do you know? Because if I were to hire Matt as a DevOps engineer, I wouldn't ask Matt like every programming language that he knows or how many of them he uses. I would probably focus more on how I'm going to describe to you a problem. How would you solve it? And those problems are typical software lifecycle problems. Like, we have way too many PRs and we have way too many manual steps in order to get this software into production. Let me show you that. How would you look about solving this? And what I would expect the person to understand is the ecosystem of tooling and the ecosystem of solutions. Not that they know all the products and they know how they all work, but if they don't even have a clue of how they might take software and to get it into production and the sort of standard steps in the industry that we need to make, that's a sign that they're maybe not right for DevOps, because often DevOps is leaned upon by hardcore developers or hardcore operators to try to bring all this tooling and all these things together to operate more efficiently, to operate more automated. And you need to understand what Docker is and what problems it solves and what problems it doesn't. You need to know how to build images in an automated way. You need to know how to create infrastructure in an automated way. And if you came to me and said, I know this tool, but not that tool, that's not that important to me. It's not really about the tool itself. It's that you understand the life cycle of problems and how you might go about solving some of those problems. So anyway, problem solving, understanding the ecosystem, and then how you can share. Those 2 things, I think, to me, are the most important qualities of DevOps. And I'm going to leave it at that because I've been talking forever.
Before we started this session today, Bret was telling me, well, one of the things we want to, sometimes these calls, they don't, there's one or just 1 or 2 questions, and then it dries up, and we need to have some stuff ready to talk about. We've had 2 questions, and it's consumed in 10 minutes. So
yeah,
I don't see how it's going to dry up.
Yeah, that's true. We do have news to share, but maybe we'll save that for next week. I mean, we could talk about Kubernetes 1.27. Not a lot of news there to share, but I do. I am making starting to make shorts on this stuff. I recorded another one last night. So if you're watching this channel on YouTube, whether it's live or after the fact, I'm experimenting with taking news or blog posts that I'm interested in and summarizing them in 60 seconds. I don't know if it's going to be useful to anyone, but I'm going to give that a shot. I've tried it a couple. I've done it a couple already.
Yep.
And one of them is Docker Compose has a brand new alpha feature that allows you to sync your files into running containers without having to bind mount code from your host, which to me is an absolute game changer. It removes a whole subset of tooling that other people, like there's one called Docker Sync, there's another one called Mutagen. They're all essentially trying to solve this problem of how do I develop locally with containers without a performance hit by sharing my software files, my developer files, over the OS boundary from Mac or Windows into Linux. And that, if you're on Linux and you're just running a Linux desktop, you don't know this problem. But on Windows and Mac, mostly on Mac, this is a problem, especially for large projects. And if you go onto the Docker roadmap, this is one of the longest running. It's got, I think, thousands of comments in a GitHub issue around performance of file mounting inside of Docker for development. But this new feature means you don't have to bind mount anymore. You build the image, and then as the files change on your system, they get synced into either it decides based on rules you give, do I rebuild the image every time? Like maybe you changed your package JSON or your requirements.txt file. I'm going to rebuild the image now based on the file watch. If you change a Python file or a Ruby file, I'm just going to copy that into the running container, and ideally your app is running some sort of its own file watcher like NodeMon or something, and it will restart if it needs to pick up those changes. That workflow has never been native in the Docker tooling. We've always had to add at least a couple of other tools to try to really solve that problem. I have a whole course on Node.js for Docker that tries to help you get over that problem of large projects are really slow. It can mean minutes instead of seconds to sometimes do things. Anyway, brand new feature, Docker Compose Sync. Go check it out on the blog. I'm excited about it. It's my one piece of news that I maybe would share today. So
That looks pretty cool. I'm just looking through the blog post right now. Looks awesome.
Yeah, it's super early days. I mean, they're calling it like an alpha. And to be fair, a lot of developers that know that this problem exists have solved it with Docker Sync or Mutagen or other tools. I've seen ton of wild. Like the more you know, the more you end up making your own custom solution to solve this problem. And the problem is it's too custom. It becomes too burdensome for a team to solve this together. And so they end up with all their own little esoteric ways of developing. And the fact that Docker Compose can now basically do file watching, what I want them to do with this is actually take it one step further. And inside the container, if, for example, with Node.js by default, if you change a JavaScript file, you need to restart Node, essentially. And that's why we have tools like NodeMon. That is true of other languages as well. Not all of them, but some of them. And Node itself doesn't really have like a built-in file watcher in the server runtime. You have to do something like NodeMon. If Docker Compose can push files into the container when they change on the host, why can't it just also have a setting that says, and after I do that, restart the container? I don't think that's a feature yet. This is actually the only syntax you need in order to enable this feature, other than you have to do a command. I think it's up here somewhere. Docker Compose Alpha command. I didn't even know that was a thing, but there's Docker Compose Alpha now. And I haven't tested it enough to think that it actually restarts the container on the inside, because it does mention things. No. Yeah, it doesn't mention that here. So, Yeah, copy change files matching the pattern into a running service container. So it's got two modes: sync or rebuild. And I feel like there should be an option here that says restart true or something like that for this. So I'm already got planning that. But yeah, I'm excited about that because my own developer workflow for larger projects when I'm working with clients is this is slow. Like especially if I have to do like an npm install in the container, or if you're someone who's building like a static website, you have to rebuild all the assets, and you're doing that across the OS boundary, that can really be slow. That can be minutes or even dozens of minutes versus seconds, or like 20 minutes instead of 2 minutes, and that all is because of that bind mount. And this essentially allows us to just not ever bind mount. There's lots of other solutions, like VS Code specifically has a thing called remote container development that allows you to do this. But those are all very, like, you have to have the right editor, and you have to be very specific. Where this is agnostic. Like, to me, this could be a remote system. Like, it doesn't even have to be local. It doesn't require some special third-party SaaS tool to sync files. Sorry, Octeto and Scaffold and all the other. There's a bunch of tooling out there around Kubernetes development as well, which this doesn't solve because Compose does not support Kubernetes. So you can't do Kubernetes development with Compose yet, which I keep asking them to let us do. But for now, this is my thing. This is my dream. This is how I would develop every day if I was a full-time developer, to use Compose, and I would use this feature.
I mean, I think back to some of the earlier workarounds for this whole thing was like, there was an FS share, or do you? Seem to remember Xhive was like, you load up Xhive, which was an alternate VM virtual machine, and then run Docker on top of that machine, and somehow that was a little bit faster for syncing files, and it was just a pain. It was always a pain, and it was very brittle, no matter what route you took. And then, there's been solutions since, but yeah, this having it all solved in the actual product is great.
Yeah. Ideally, a lot of times with teams, I try to implement a rule of there needs to be a lot of friction in order to require a new tool for people, and it has to. So you can basically, there's a low bar if you want to replace a tool with another tool, or replace even better, replace two tools with one tool. But if you have to add a new tool to everyone's workflow, because we're all so exhausted with the number of tools that are in our workflows, you can't add a new tool, a net add tool to our workflow as a team, without like committee approval.
Yeah.
Because there's new tool. Especially in CNCF, right? Like you and I, like we can't even go a week and not read about something new, a new experiment, a new GitHub repo, and it's really just the success of open source, the low bar of entry we have now, and that has created. And I see a lot of teams where it has really created a lot of bloat, a lot of tooling bloat. And it's one thing if you have your own tools and your own workflow, but then the minute you implement that in a team and it becomes like a team mandate, I always have pushback, because I'm like, let's make sure everyone is willing, that there's not a big cost. How can we automate this? How can we maybe use a different tool with a little bit of automation to do the same thing? Yeah. And Oh My Mindy is pointing out that Podman can do this with Podman Kube Play, runs your Kubernetes manifest, and you can combine that with Rootless Podman, essentially to have an easy developer workflow with a low bar of entry. There are dedicated other tools to do this, like Octeto is one I mentioned that allows you to do remote Kubernetes development. You can even use a Compose file, so you don't even really have to know what the infrastructure is. They're just removing those barriers for you. And we've got lots of other tools out there that try to do the same thing, and Podman's one of them. So.
We had Podman, those two guys from Podman on last time. In the week since, have you played around with Podman?
Yeah. Well, I already have Podman.
Okay.
I have Podman and Podman Desktop installed, but
I went to install it and I saw, oh, I already have it installed. So I do too. I just haven't really done much with it since. But that's
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. And I'm not doing development on Kubernetes. So like there's the edge cases for me specifically, the edge cases where Podman would shine. I don't live in those edge cases. Like there's a lot of overlap between Docker and Podman and the functionality it kind of gives you. But I'm not trying to run, I'm on a Mac. So initially for years, Podman really was only good for a Linux host if you were on a Linux desktop. Or you had a single server that you were managing, like something that would have a Docker engine, but you didn't really want to run as Docker as root. And we didn't have Rootless yet until like 2019. And then at that time, it was still experimental. So yeah, there's a lot of overlap, and I quite frankly, I don't know anyone that uses Podman. I just don't. And I mean, those guys are great. They have great ideas, and I wish them the best. I even went and looked at, Google Trends to try to figure out if there's is there a world where Podman is a big deal and everybody's using it, and I'm just not, because I understand I have my own worldview and I have blinders on sometimes, and I don't see that world. And I mean that there might be small little pockets of ecosystems that really lean on Podman as their default, but like if you look at Google Trends, it's like Docker's way up here. Kubernetes is like halfway up to Docker. It's never been as popular as Docker is in terms of a search term. And then Podman is at the zero line, and it's just not. It's not really talked about a lot. So not that it's not worth looking at, but we get a lot of Podman questions on the show about should I use Podman, and I feel like everybody should check it out. Everyone should try it, and it might speak to you. And it might solve a specific problem that you have with the existing tooling, but I just don't. I see very few people actually using it. I've had 0 clients ever use it. But then again, they come to me because I'm the Docker guy. so they're not coming to me because I'm the Podman guy. So I understand that there's like this subjective opinion I have that is very much a worldview problem. And I don't work with a lot of enterprise Red Hat operators where I feel like that's where it sings. Like all their tools, Builda, Scopio, Cryo, Podman Machine, like these things I feel like are very much in the Red Hat world of we are Red Hat operators. We live in Linux. We know Linux. I mean, these guys have been doing Linux since its origin days, and I tend to work with a lot of teams that they haven't used Linux for 5 years maybe. I mean, they're pretty new to it. They don't really know all the system internals that well. They don't have their own opinions around exactly how tooling on a Linux operating system should work. Because to a lot of people, Docker was an anti-pattern. It was this huge monolith app that did everything in a very friendly and convenient UI, but it wasn't the Unix way. And you could watch that episode and see that. Like you could sort of understand that that's what they're advocating for is the Unix way. And Docker was written by web developers, as they pointed out, to solve web developer workflow problems, and they wanted to implement a container runtime in the Unix mindset. And I love it, and I love having both of these opinions. It's just not something I need.
Yep.
And Mindy seems like, my Mindy sounds like they know what they're talking about. I work with Red Hat centric customers where running things as root is not an option. So Podman Rootless is great since it integrates way better with Red Hat. Yeah. Yeah, very much so. And Docker responded to that because Docker was constantly getting complaints about things like not running as root. So if you go to get.docker.com/rootless, you get the install script for Docker to run as a regular user, not as root. The problem with that is you can't do everything that Docker can do because Linux has things like you can't make network interfaces that expose a host port without root by default. I think that's one of the things. So networking between containers and creating custom networks and publishing ports on the host, and These are things that maybe require root, especially if it's a port below 1024. So a lot of times people say, I'd rather not run as root, but then they don't realize, oh, I actually need root to do what I was doing. Because Linux is Linux. And the same is true of Docker Desktop. Like now, just this year, Docker Desktop can finally be installed as a non-root user on a Mac. But it will not be able to do everything with networking, like use ports below 1024, unless you give it root permissions, root on a Mac, which is still the same concept of root as Linux. But a lot of us, want both worlds. I want to run as non-root, but also listen on port 80, stuff like that. So it can be tricky, and it's very much a case by case on whether root can be avoided. We use a lot. John says we use a lot of Podman and OpenShift. Yeah, and I think that's its strong suit, right? Like Red Hat tooling. If you're in the Red Hat ecosystem, it's very it's rich. It's got lots. It's manual labor to put Docker on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? So you have to take extra steps. I like that. I saw this comment earlier, by the way, on changing ownership of files as they transfer in. So that is actually an assumption I have, that when it copies it in, it makes it the default permissions of that directory that it's in. I'm going to test that. I want to see if that works, because permissions obviously is always, when you're developing inside of Linux containers, permissions can be a problem, especially when you're trying to edit files, change them. All right, we've been going pretty long now. I think we've wrapped up the questions. Oh, well, we got some more comments, but you can add an option to syscontrol to allow non-root users to bind to ports below. There you go, 1024. I've got my my Linux gurus on chat, so I don't have to be one. All right, I feel like we've answered a lot of questions, and I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
Yeah. I'm pretty good.
I'm ready to take a break. Well, thank you all for being here. Matt, thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah. I'm ready to go back into my office to try to figure out why my audio is not working, so I can not do it from my patio.
You've also had some delay today, too. You had some mic delay, so yeah. I have those days.
Yeah, they got to figure that out. Yeah.
Well, thanks, everyone, for being here. This is something we do live every week. We don't always just chat ourselves. We often, basically every other week, we have a guest. And if you haven't heard recently, here's the lineup. So next week, we've got Corey Quinn from the Duckbill Group. We're going to talk about all the ways to run containers in AWS, which there are at least 17. I was thinking of calling it 1,000 ways to run containers in AWS and just see what 1 million ways. And see if we get a bunch of people.
You just round up to the nearest 1,000 to get that number?
Right, add a couple of zeros. Yeah, sure. It's just zeros. It doesn't mean anything. We're also going to have Jake Warner, the CEO and founder of Cycle. And Cycle.io has been on the show before. I like to bring in ideas that seem unusual in the ecosystem. And what I like about Cycle is that they basically said years ago, we're going to make this so simple that you don't even have to worry about Docker or Kubernetes. We're going to run containers, but we're going to run our own orchestrator, and we're going to build our own kernel locked down OS that you can use anywhere, self-hosted in any cloud, but it's going to be our own custom Linux distribution, and it includes the networking, it includes the orchestration, and you do it all through our SaaS. It's an interesting idea. I've only dabbled in it, and they seem to be having a lot of success. And so he and I talk back and forth. So we're having them on the show to talk about Cycle. If you're someone who's stressed about the complexity of Kubernetes, but you're not ready to commit to something like Swarm, and you really want something easy with a web GUI, and it kind of takes care of a lot of the internals for you, the security, the networking, all that stuff. Cycle is trying to see if that's a thing people want, and it seems like people do, because he keeps telling me about new stuff they're doing. So we're gonna have them on. We're gonna have Michael Cade from Castine on, which is or Caston, That is a Veeam product for backing up Kubernetes. We've had backup products on here before, but let's talk about that one because it's at the conferences. I see people talking about it. We're going to have Brendan Burns from Microsoft, one of the original founders of the Kubernetes project. That's going to happen in June. We've got Canonical on, the Ubuntu people, going to be on talking about multipass. We're going to be, we got Uffizi on. We're going to be talking about ephemeral or for ephemeral environments in CI/CD, or what we might call them preview environments. We're going to talk about those. Oh my goodness, we've got so much stuff. So come back on Thursdays. This all turns into a podcast below. If you look below this video in the description, there are links for the podcast, as well as show notes. All that stuff's there for past episodes. And Matt, where can people find you on all the things?
All the things. I'm Techno Evangelist everywhere. And then our company InfraHQ, although you're not really going to see much about what we're actually up to right now, infrahq.com. But that's Techno Evangelist. That's me.
That's you everywhere. You've cornered it. You've taken that part of the internet. Are you one that you actually like as soon as like a new thing comes out and you think it's going to be a thing like Blue Sky, you go and sign up and commandeer that right away?
I should do that more often because I feel like there's a few places I'm not Techno Evangelist.
Right, you got to squat on your name rights. Are you on Blue Sky, by the way?
I don't know about Blue Sky. Not yet.
The Twitter, Jack.
I need to be there.
Jack's new Twitter replacement, Blue Sky Social.
No.
You haven't heard of this? Okay.
Do I need an invite?
Yes, and I don't know how you get one. You can sign up on their website. It's like blueskysocial.xyz or something like that. It's basically, it's meant to be more open than Twitter, but not as complex as Mastodon. That's my take. I'm not actually an expert. I don't have an account yet. I have not even used it or even seen it other than screenshots of other people using it. But ironically, one of the founders and board members of Twitter is making its competitor and just released a beta. So I don't understand how that works. The Pivot podcast, a great podcast, by the way. Scott Galloway pointed out, how did they allow a board member of Twitter to not have a non-compete for building a clone, a competing platform? It's more than just a platform. It's got an underlying protocol that's meant to allow this to be a more open ecosystem of products around short message stuff, I guess.
Yeah, I saw a discussion of the protocol a couple of days ago, but I didn't realize I didn't connect them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, the first iteration, I guess, is Blue Sky Social. And someone in chat's probably going, Brett, you're explaining it all wrong. You're totally wrong. But I don't have an account yet either. So I was just curious because you got me Arc, my favorite new browser, which everybody has been watching me in this amazing new browser called Arc. Yeah. So I thought maybe you had access to all the new things, and I needed to just ask you for all the invites.
No. I need. Hopefully, somebody who's watching has access and will be nice to us and send us invites.
Okay. I'm looking at chat. Varash, sorry, we're not gonna be able to answer your questions because we're wrapping up the show. We're just chatting for a moment before we quit. But we're here live every Thursday, so come back next week, an hour and a half earlier, and we will be here. We'll be here every Thursday. Okay, so there's a couple of ideas coming in for people. John's asking about DevSpace. I have not had DevSpace on yet. I have heard of them. I don't know anyone that's using them, so I haven't had someone like give me a raving review on that. We have had other competing tools. Here's DevSpace. We've had other competing tools to DevSpace on the show before, and yeah. So we should probably, we'll have them on eventually. I don't have a plan for them yet, but if you have, there's actually a guy's picture here. Oh, this is just the support team chat. Okay, I was like, how do I get someone on this show? I usually need to know their Twitter, and then I will publicly call them out on Twitter. Is what I end up doing. Social pressure to be on the show. And Oma Mindy is asking about Nix and Nix OS. So it's funny. I couldn't figure out if Nix was a topic for this. So this channel, let's just bring up Nix so we all know what we're talking about. So I learned about this at a conference. Someone was telling me that, like this solves the reproducibility problem that Docker doesn't solve. And I didn't take to it. And so my own biases were like, well, I'm not even really sure this is something for our show, because if you haven't noticed, this show we don't do all dev stuff. Like that I'm focused this channel on DevOps and containers specifically. So if you had to like niche this show, it's cloud native container DevOps. That would be like the niche that we're trying to fit. And so there's a lot of other great channels, a lot of other channels that I follow on YouTube that do all dev tooling, like anything in the dev space. And I don't go that broad typically. And I was worried. I was like, I'm not sure if Nginx or not Nginx, Nix is actually like a thing that we should talk about on this show, because it's not specifically to me like a container thing that I would recommend to people. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's super easy to build a container image with Nix. All right, so there you go. And yeah, the way I learned about it was someone was telling me they got rid of Docker they stopped using Docker files and Docker builds because they wanted it to be more reproducible, and Nix did that. So if someone thinks that that's still a topic that's focused on what we want to talk about here, I will reconsider. I think I kind of wrote it off a little bit and said, I'll wait for some more people to ask me about it. So there you go. More people asked about it. And then Nix OS, which I looked at and then wasn't really, I was like, do we talk about OSs on this show? So yeah, I'll reach out. I'll find somebody. It's a good idea. I'm glad someone else mentioned it, because I think it was only that one person that ever mentioned it to me. And maybe someone in chat in our Discord server. A lot of times the topics come from above Matt's head, the Discord server. People in there are talking about containers and DevOps already, and then they bring up links and things, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I didn't know about that. Let me go ask them to be on the show. All right, the Conrad's giving us a vote too. So Martin Wimpress, which I think I've and I think I actually follow them on Martin on Twitter. So that might be easy to get them on. Actually, wait, was Martin already on this show? This is how many people I've had on. Like, I've had so many people on this show, I actually forget sometimes who's been on this show.
I feel like I've lost connection.
No, I can hear you. You're a little jerky. Can't hear me? Well, we're wrapping it up anyway, folks. So, yeah, Martin, I'm going to have to look back. I might have actually, sometimes you follow people online so much, or you've met them at a conference, that you then confuse about where did I have this person on the show? Did I just meet them at a conference? Do I just know them all online and I don't even really know them in the real world? So forgive me if I am already forgetting about the past. I mean, we've had over 200 shows, so I'm starting to forget. Ubuntu Mate, yeah. All right, I'm going to reach out on that. I appreciate that recommendation. So if people want to see it, let's do it. All right, Matt, I will see you next week. Thanks for being here.
So good. I'm going to have my audio figured out because you keep dropping.
Oh, no. All right, it's the end of the show. That's our computer's cue that we need to wrap it up.
Yep.
So thanks, everyone, for being here. We'll be here again live next week. Appreciate you so much. See you soon.